Hi, I'm Matt Stoller, author of Monopoly-focused newsletter Big and host of the podcast Organized Money. Now, I look at the world of finance and monopoly, but from the people's point of view. Now, I love Doritos. Who doesn't? They are so good. So I actually got a bag. Because this segment is going to talk about how a bag of Doritos actually explains our economy. I'm gonna have one. All right. So this is not a party-sized bag because I couldn't find one, but it's a pretty big bag. But we're going to talk about party-sized bags of Doritos. Now, in January, the price of one of the big bags at Albertsons, which is a big supermarket chain in a town in Southern California, was $2.49. At a nearby independent grocery, Sunset Market, the price stamped on the bag was $6.29. Now, we've all had the experience of going into a small store. Sometimes it's dingy. There's like a guy that's been working there forever. The stuff is expensive. And that is in contrast to sort of the big professional, airy, big discounters like Walmart or a Costco or an Albertsons. And they sell stuff like consumer packaged goods like Doritos cheaper. I'm gonna have another chip. These things, they're addictive. You probably shouldn't eat these, but they're so good. Okay. Now, most people, when they encounter this dynamic, they think that the little stores are outdated. They don't use technology or something. Maybe they're greedy or whatever it is. But that's actually not true. Historically, independent grocers are far more innovative. So historically, they invented the first modern self-service supermarket. That wasn't a chain store, it was an independent. They invented automatic doors, shopping carts, loyalty programs. In fact, there's a different reason why small stores are more expensive for consumer packaged goods stuff like Doritos. Now, I got a hold of a lawsuit filed in February of this year against Pepsi. And Pepsi is one of those giant conglomerates that owns Frito-Lay, and Frito-Lay owns and makes Doritos. And in that complaint is the real explanation for why small stores have such a hard time competing with lower prices. In this complaint, lawyers allege that Pepsi has a deal to give the big guys a better wholesale price than the little guy. So the proprietor of the small shop, Sunset Market, this is the stat I used before, they charged, the stamp on the bag was $6.29, but wholesale, which is the price that the distributor sold to Sunset Market, was charged $4.63 from its distributor. And somehow Albertsons was able to charge $2.49 retail and still make money. So somehow Albertsons was charging 46% less than the small grocer actually could buy at wholesale. In fact, the smaller grocer could go to Albertsons, pick it up off the shelf for a better price than they could get it from their own distributor. And that's crazy. So in other words, there are two prices for a bag of Doritos. A high one if you're a small business, and a low one if you're a big business with a lot of bargaining power. Now, this is a phenomenon called price discrimination, and it is rampant in our economy. So here's an independent grocer, Anthony Pena, talking about the problem in 2022 to the Federal Trade Commission. And that was a time when there were shortages, it was hard to get product. And Pena owns 9 grocery stores in New York, and he specializes them for their varying communities. So the one near a college town has budget items. The one near a Portuguese community carries a certain type of salted fish. But he still needs the must-have items that everybody buys, like milk, eggs, butter, soda, chips, orange juice, things like Doritos. So here's what he said about the problem.
Orange juice, for example. It's a must-have commodity in grocery stores. Just months ago, I was buying a 59-ounce orange juice just north of $4 a unit, where we couldn't get the supplier to sell it to us simply because there are none or their limited quantities are available to us. Meanwhile, I go to the bigger box like a Walmart or a club store. They not only do they have it fully stocked, but they have it about half the price that I would buy it for at cost.
All right. I can't stop eating these. All right. So in the supermarket sector, you saw what he said. And this price discrimination means that the big guys can make sure they have a pricing advantage in the must-have items. And that way they can always beat people like Pena and his stores. He he's a small business owner, but they're not like that small. He employs hundreds of people. He has a bunch of different stores, but he can't compete. Okay, so why do they do this? Why does Pepsi give a worse price? Why do they charge more to people like Pena? Well, they charge more to small stores because they can. If Sunset Market or Pena says, Pepsi, I've had it with you, we're not buying Doritos anymore unless you give us a better price, Pepsi will just say, whatever, we don't care. Your business doesn't matter to us. It's a rounding error. But if Walmart does it, Walmart sells a fifth of all groceries in America. Well, then Pepsi is in trouble. So Walmart can say, we want better prices from you, Pepsi. And Pepsi says yes. And that's not just Pepsi, it's kind of all of the consumer packaged goods makers and everybody who supplies in the grocery space. Now, it's not just like Pepsi has to do it. There's a flip side. There's a benefit for the big consumer packaged goods makers. After all, why couldn't someone just make a version of Doritos and undercut Pepsi? These are good, but they're not it's not magic, right? It's basically like, some salt and some corn oil, a few chemicals, right? Well, the reason is that if you were to create a new product to compete with Doritos that was as addictive or good or healthier or whatever, it's really, really hard to get into Walmart. So we saw this dynamic in 2024 when Snoop Dogg and Master P set up a cereal company called Broadus Foods to sell cereal to fans. And they cut a deal with the breakfast giant Host Consumer Brands to distribute their products to, among others, Walmart. The thing is, it turns out that Post and Walmart were secretly sabotaging them. So Post allegedly entered into a false arrangement where they could choke Broadus Foods out of the market, thereby preventing Snoop cereal from being sold or by any rival, right? Because the Snoop cereal was competing with Post's own cereal. In other words, bigness likes bigness. So the big consumer package companies, the big conglomerates, and the big retailers, they kind of benefit each other, right? This is actually something called the waterbed effect. So everything bad started in the 70s. What the waterbed effect means is that the big guys get the better prices, and then everybody on the edge, when somebody sits in a waterbed, everybody on the edge, the water goes there, and so the prices go up. And so that's what's really going on. The big producers and big distributors and retailers essentially work together to keep smaller rivals out of the market. And the main mechanism they use to do that is price discrimination. Okay, but you might say, whatever, who cares? If there's a small store or a big store, what do I care? I'm just buying stuff, right? I'm going to get my Doritos as cheap as I can. And that's what consumers think. But there is a problem here. There are a number of problems. And the immediate one is that it raises prices. And the dynamic is not obvious at first, right? I mean, Walmart or Amazon, they do seem to have low prices. But do they really? I mean, sure, they're going to have the lowest relative to others, but that's because they're forcing prices up everywhere else. They're sitting in the middle of the waterbed. What's happening is that the big guys are setting the floor and then gradually raising that floor. So as an example, I'm just going to note, in 2024, prices for third-party goods on Amazon, it's about 60% of what Amazon sells, went up by 7%, which is more than twice as fast as overall inflation. It's cheaper to buy on Amazon for a variety of reasons, but it's not cheap. And sometimes price hikes are masked so you don't see them, right? So some of the dollar stores, right, they get something called, in the industry, and it's an amazing name, it's called a cheater size for something like detergent. A cheater size package, it's the same size as, a regular detergent, but it contains less. And so they can charge less, but it's not like it's not a better deal. You're getting less detergent for less money. So to consumers, it might appear cheaper, but you're just not getting as much. Now, independent grocers, when they have to compete with what is essentially a deceptive practice, have asked for the same thing. They've asked, give us cheater sizes too, right? But they get refused by the big consumer package companies. Now, this isn't so much a competition issue with the independents and the big guys. It's that imagine if there is now an industry category called cheater sizes, right? That's what price discrimination has led us to. So there are other problems with price discrimination. In the 1990s, we started seeing something called food deserts. And a food desert is where there's a community that doesn't have a grocery store. I mean, this is a new thing in the 1990s, right? So it didn't used to exist. A community, even poor communities that didn't have a grocer, that used to be an economic opportunity for an enterprising individual. You open a store and voila, there are customers right there who don't, they're not going to go anywhere else because there's no grocery store. So you can just open a grocery store. But the problem is today, the wholesale prices are so skewed that independent stores just can't compete with a cheaper chain store across town or in a rural area, even if it's 40 miles away. As a result, there's a lot of places that just don't have a grocery store anymore because it's just not worth starting one. You can't succeed. It's dollar stores without fresh food or a Walmart 40 miles away or nothing. There's also like a sameness to America. The ability to price discriminate means that the bigger you are, the better your competitive edge. And that creates an urge to merge. So today, most consumer packaged goods are made by a small number of conglomerates, and most food is sold by giant supermarket chains. Everyone sells the same stuff with little regional variations. So like you get Doritos, right? But if you go to some place, that's far away in America, maybe somebody has like a different way of making chips that uses regional ingredients, but they're not going to be able to start a business and they're not going to be able to get into the local stores. It's Doritos everywhere. I like Doritos, but I would also like other stuff too. And the thing is that this lack of variety, the sameness, is not true in other countries. It's not even true in places like New York City, where independent bodegas are pretty common and they could just, put something on the shelf and see if it sells. So also these small number of packaged goods companies, they use a lot of sugar and chemicals. Like this is addictive, right? Food shouldn't be addictive. They have a lot of scientists that are trying to make food addictive. And so one of the things that's happening is if this is the only consumer packaged goods that you can buy, you get an obesity epidemic. And there actually is some pretty good research linking the opening of a Walmart superstore to an increase in obesity in that region. So, I could go on. The concentrated buying power, sometimes these big guys are called power buyers. It also pushes down prices for farmers. And farmers themselves have to consolidate to maintain pricing power. So you have the whole agriculture sector that's consolidating as well. Bigness likes bigness likes bigness. And it's not just groceries. Everything in America is about price discrimination now. Hospital services, search engines, rest stop shops, shipping, credit card fees. It's harder to find an industry where there isn't price discrimination than one where there is. You go to a hospital, depending on your insurance or depending on whether you have insurance, that knee surgery could cost an endless number of different prices. And it's the same knee surgery, and that doesn't make any sense. It wasn't always this way in America. I said this stuff started, the food desert started in the 90s. There's a law that actually says you can't do price discrimination. In certain narrow circumstances you can, but essentially you can't do it to kill competitors, which is the real reason that firms do it. And this law is called the Robinson-Patman Act. It was passed in 1936, but there's a long history before that of opposition to price discrimination. And that's the law that lawsuit that I referenced earlier was using. Now, the thing is Robinson-Patman, by and large, stopped being enforced in the early 1980s, and not coincidentally, that was the same time that Walmart and the chain stores exploded. Now, recently there was some good news about the law. Under the last Federal Trade Commission, the chair, who's a woman named Lena Khan, filed a suit against Pepsi for deals with a giant retailer. They redacted it, but everybody knew it was Walmart. They also filed one against a company you probably haven't heard of called Southern Glacier, which is the largest liquor distributor in America. That too is I said it's everywhere. So that's why Total Wine has better prices and so on and so forth, or allegedly, because they buy for better prices from Southern Glacier. Now, I said there's good news, but there's also bad news because that was under the Biden administration. And unfortunately, the Trump Federal Trade Commission chair, his name is Andrew Ferguson, he dropped that lawsuit. Still, it's not, that's a really bad thing that Chair Ferguson did, is still continuing with the Southern Glacier one, so that law is not dead. But there are private cases, right? And a lot more private cases are starting, and also states are beginning to act because you can bar price discrimination on a state level. Some states actually do that. Okay, so let's take a step back. Americans in general are very angry about politics. And there are a number of explanations, and they all have some merit. So the left generally says that's because we don't tax the rich enough. The right generally says that government is too big. But, one answer, I'm not saying those are wrong, one answer might be a little bit simpler. What if a major problem in our society is just that people who are big and powerful can get a bag of Doritos at a price that you and I, if we were in that business, just couldn't? A dollar difference in a bag of chips may not sound like much, but if most stuff in the economy, most transactions are slightly tilted to the big guys, then we will live in a society with a few effectively plantation owners who get good prices, and then the rest of us who live at their beck and call. That's not fair. And previous generations of Americans realized that. It's not liberty to live in a society like that. So the question is, like those earlier generations, will we start realizing it? Thanks for watching this big breakdown on the Breaking Points channel. If you'd like to know more about big business and how our economy really works, you can sign up for my newsletter by going to the link in the description below. Thanks. Have a good one.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.